Okay, for this block, it's called Sunny Day, and this block I've got all of my parts cut out and ready to go. These I did put into squares and not as long strips, which would have been a little quicker to make, but that's how the pattern's written, so I'm just going to follow what I have. On the large squares, I did draw a line from corner to corner because we're going to sew on both sides of that drawn line and then cut it in half to make our half square triangles. So that is going to be the first step, is to place right sides together, the two larger squares, and then sew on both sides of that drawn line. Alright, so I'm just going to lay these right sides together and then sew a scant 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line. When I get to the end, I'm going to leave my needle in the down position to pivot and then continue on the other side. Okay, now that I have sewn them on both sides of the drawn line, I'm going to take it and cut right on that drawn line. So I'll have 2 half square triangles and press them open. Now that I have them pressed, I'm going to use my block lock ruler and I'm going to trim them to 3.5 inches. So you want all your blocks to be the same size before you start the next step. Now that I have my blocks all trimmed out, I'm going to set the block up using the layout provided. I'm going to use my Steady Betty board to lay the block out. Makes things a lot easier. So in the corners we have some 4 patches. Actually, I could probably sew these together, but make sure these go like this. Actually, mix that up. Okay, and my dark and my dark are opposites. My block is bigger than what my Steady Betty is, so I'm just going to scoot things over. They're going to overlap a little bit, but that's all right. Make sure my dark is in the right corner, and then should have pressed those a little bit better before I started laying them out. But this is just 2 4 patches together, so I just have to make sure that they alternate. And I'm going to continue just building it down. All these we will just sew into rows. They sew it pretty quickly, so even though they're not in strips, which would have made the piecing a little bit easier, they do sew up pretty quick because there's a bunch, but there's not a ton. Okay, so I'm gonna wait for the bottom row because I don't have any more space on here. So I'm just gonna take this, and you can see I still am missing 1 row down here, but I'm gonna transfer this over to my sewing machine and start piecing the sections together. All right, I'm just gonna start sewing my 4 patches together. And if I do each section, so the top section's with the light down and this bottom part is with the light up, when I snip them apart, they will actually can be sewn together in a 4 patch pretty quickly. So I'll show you. Get these other 2 done. So I've got my dark on the top there, then my dark on the bottom here. So when I snip them off, I'm going to snip them off in a section of 2. When I open them up, they will be opposite each other, and then I can just fold it over and sew them together. Make sure that the seams go opposite of each other and kind of nest. It's called nest your seams. It lays a lot flatter and makes your block look nicer. So we're going to put them together. Make sure your seams are going to be going one way, opposite directions there. So then this is the top left corner, and I can sew it to the first half square triangle, and then this is the other corner. Alright, so I've got my corner piece and my other half square triangle, and I'm going to sew these two together. And I'm just going to snip this off and put it in place, and I'm going to start working on my 4 patches. There's a bunch of them in the center, so I'm just going to get these done. Well, there's 4 of them, so start my next one. And my last 4 patch right here. Then we'll cut them off, snip them in pairs of 2s, and then we can stitch them together. Alright, so this is my other top part, and then I'm going to snip this off in a pair of 2, and this one in a pair of 2, this one pair of 2. Okay, so I'm just going to continue to open these up and stitch them together, make a 4 patch. I can start sewing them together in their pairs. So I've got 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. Sew these 2 together. I can snip these 2 off. I'm going to snip these apart, make sure I get them lined up properly. Alright, got these together. And I do have my side half square triangles that I need to sew together, and they were already laid out correctly, so I'm going to just put them together, sew them up. Then I'm going to sew the other 2 half square triangles together. And I sewed this seam earlier and it was incorrect. So I had to unpick it really quick and sew it again. And now I do have my 4 patches at the bottom that I do need to sew as well. So I've got my center 4 patches. Those are the ones I just finished. So I'm going to sew these really quick. Make sure I do opposite, so the dark's on the top, dark's on the bottom. And my last one here. Okay, so I've got my center half square or 4 patches done. And now I need to sew the last row of the 4 patches together. Then I can start putting this block together because I've got all my parts. Need to readjust this. All right, so I'm going to sew the center section. So I've got my 4 patch center and my half square triangles on the side. So I'm just going to line them up. The seam that you want to take notice is the center seam. So that is what should line up kind of perfectly. And then you can pin it if you need or whatever, but that center seam should line up with the center seam of the half square triangles perfectly. So make sure it is. And then I'm going to take my 4 patch in, let's see, the greens need to go like this, and I need to sew it to the 4 patch, or the half square triangle, I mean. So that is my next one. This is my bottom row. Make sure my seam is going correctly. I've got my half square triangles sewn to my 4 patches, and now I'm going to sew the other half square triangles to the other side. Again, the center seam should line up really well. So I'm going to start with that. All right, and then I've got my top row, but I still need one more piece sewn to it to connect those 2 corners. All right, so now my whole center section is done. Now I need to finish the bottom row, and I've got part of it, 1 corner complete, and now I need to add my other half square triangle as well as that 4 patch. And since my top row is now complete, I will sew that to the center section. And these seams should line up as well as your center ones. So they're all equal in size. So it's easy to keep it lined up and squared up properly. Shouldn't have too much wiggle in here. It should all fit together nicely. Again, nest your seams if you can. Makes your block lay a lot flatter. All right, I've got one more part to add to the bottom of this. And that goes right like here. And then I can complete the block. All right, so just to show you what I've got done so far, I've got the top row and the center section done. And I just completed the bottom row, so I can line this up. And again, watch those seams because they should all match, and sew them together. Just checking on my seam there, making sure I'm lined up and that it's going the right direction. All right, now it needs a good pressing, and then I'll show the block off.